different from the title that is in your guide, but it's basically the same words, just in a different order. Thank you all for coming out today. So yeah, my name's Jerry Shannon. I'm a faculty member at University of Georgia in the Department of Geography. I'm going to talk with you today a little bit about ventures into viral map making. When we think about viral maps, probably what comes to mind, and I'm recognizing there's many serious cartographers and map makers in this room, right? So we can appreciate the value of maps that look like this, right? So this is a map that's made from Foursquare data of the best fast food locations in each state. Chick-fil-A pretty much rules the roost, right? There's some warning signs here that you can look at. So if you look at, say, Texas, In-N-Out Burger, really? Well, it turns out this is actually, there's an article in the Ringer called "The Internet Has Ruined Maps" that uses this as case study number one. The issue is there's a kind of small n problem here, so they take like number of ratings divided by number of locations, and so what you have is basically the cult of In-N-Out Burger in Texas is like very strong. You have a small group of devoted followers who are very vocal on Foursquare. But that is not to say that viral maps can't answer pressing social questions. So for instance, what is the relationship between Justin Bieber fans and fans of Beyonce? Turns out it's pretty much perfect negative autocorrelation. Right, so if you look at the two of those together, this is a map from the New York Times, right? We can see how these two fan bases really live in different worlds, at least geographically. So more seriously, how do we think about viral maps? How do we frame what's going on with viral maps? And this is something I hadn't really thought about before this experience that I had last year that I'm about to tell you about a little bit later on. But there is a literature out there. So within geography, there's a small but growing literature. Anthony Robbins is going to talk to us in a second about a piece he had published recently. A few years ago, Ian Muhlenhaus had a piece called "Going Viral, the Online Look of Persuasive Maps." That's really kind of a lot of the literature right there in terms of explicitly online viral maps. It's not something that geography is engaged a lot with. That's not to say there's not relevant literature. So certainly if we look at going back to The Power of Maps, going back to the classic Harley piece, Deconstructing the Map. There is literature out there about the role that maps play within public life, the ways that maps circulate through public life. We can look at literature on neogeography that's more recent, right, and deals with some of these same kinds of questions, but not about viral content particularly. So if we have to go out beyond geography to take a look at that. There is some work on this. So just a couple of things that comes out of work beyond the discipline of geography specifically. One is that viral content has affective power, that it is affective. That is, it engages with emotions in various ways. So the studies listed here all kind of highlight how the content that is most apt to go viral excites emotions, particularly strong emotions, hate, anger, right? Things that get you passionate about things, not just like, oh, that's cute, you know, like, yeah, I guess cute puppies go around, but it's this stuff that gets you riled up and wants to make you act. So there's an affective element to that. And there's been several good presentations already here at NACIS about the affective power of maps, and we're going to come back to this as we go. Another thing that comes up, and this is particularly in literature on communication studies, is the role of what's called phatic communication. And this is a term that's relatively new to me, but phatic communication is basically small talk. It's the nothing things that we say to each other. Yeah, it's kind of cold outside today. You know, how about those bears? You know, like it's that kind of stuff that is kind of trivial, but at the same time, this Blomert and Veris piece that's highlighted here is titled "The Importance of Unimportant Language." What it's doing is not so much the content, but the function of it socially. It's affirming social ties, social connections. If I'm standing in line with you at a buffet for lunch, right, and we strike up a conversation, we're talking about kind of basic stuff, what I'm saying is I want to engage. I want to find some point of connection. I want to talk with you. And so the quote that's here, that these everyday forms of convivial interaction ensure and generate community membership. They restate, they reaffirm group identity in ways that can be really helpful or useful. Another element out of the communication literature, thinking about timing. So it's not just kind of that we're together, but we're together at this moment. So this is a piece by Stephanie V that appeared in the online publication First Monday, and she uses the phrase kairotic moment, from kairos, kind of that moment, that time, the right time. The kairotic moment when that content hits and it catches fire. And if it had happened at another time, maybe it wouldn't have had that same effect. And then we can also think about in what ways can viral content be linked to social action. So this is a dissertation that was done actually earlier this year at University of Central Florida by Jennifer Miller, and she talks about, she was looking at the role of memes in activism around breast cancer specifically. So she did an experiment like, can memes lead to social action around breast cancer? And her basic thesis, I won't read the quote here, but her basic argument is that by mobilizing people into a particular kind of group identity, right? Or actually, I will read it. It assembles individuals into a grassroots force propagating the retained signs of the cause. That is, it kind of puts you together in this group that then is primed for action. You can kind of organize through social media, through viral content, to get people motivated to act in a particular way. So you can, in her case, she took a meme and said, you can repurpose this meme, share it on social media, and then here's how you can participate beyond that as well. So it creates this pathway towards social action. So we can think about the fact that viral content from all these things, it's emotional, it's effective, it's social, right? It brings us together around something at a particular time, and it enables maybe a capacity to act together in some way. Okay, so let's talk about a couple of case studies here. I'm going to give you an example from my co-author on this still emerging paper, Kyle Walker, and one from my own experience as well. So let me just walk through both of those briefly. The first one is this map, which is a dot density map. There's been several of these genre around. Probably the most famous one was a map on race in the United States using 2010 census data. So this is using NACIS data on educational attainment. And Kyle put this together using Mapbox as a platform. And what you've got, it's a dot density map. So it's taking literally every dot equals one person for the most part, especially when you scale in. Actually, one of the things he did is as you scale out, you get less dots. So there's a scalable to make it load a little more quickly. You can zoom in. So here's zooming into Norfolk. And you can turn on and off the layers. So you see here, the advantage of this over choropleth map, you can see where there's mixing, see where it's clearer. And then you can turn layers on and off and actually generate a chart of what percentage of the total dots fall into each of those categories from it. So it's a map to kind of understand what's going on in terms of educational attainment at any particular location. This got a lot of play. So there's a City Lab article about it specifically that generated a lot of interest or popularity from it. Called Mapping the Achievement Gap. A lot of local newspapers picked this up as like, hey, let's talk about what's going on in our city, right? And so you see an example here where Boston's most educated neighborhoods. And so we'll talk a little bit about that as we move through the case study, but that's basically kind of his play how it played out. I also point out he had this piece that's published I think a week or two ago. It just went online in Cartographica about the technical aspects of putting this map together. So if anybody's interested, you can check out Scaling the Interactive Dot Map and see what he has to say there. My own experience, somewhat surreal, is on making this map. Again, we spend a lot of time, sometimes as cartographers, putting together these really detailed and important and data-fed maps. This was not one of those. So Joshua Stevens, who's sitting right here, and so I feel some pressure, put out this tweet. This is in the run-up to the Eclipse last year on, there's no Eclipse maps to make. He was putting, I believe you had a lot of other maps before this that were more like, here's details about where the eclipse is going to happen, what you can see. And people were saying, okay, enough with the Eclipse maps. And he said, oh no. So what you have up in the upper right-hand corner is Bigfoot sightings in purple, along with the Eclipse map. So if you want to see Bigfoot and Eclipse at the same time, there you go. You're set. And this got picked up, John Nelson, who I don't think is here in this room, he's around, did one with UFO sightings. I study food access. I live in the South, so I said Waffle House. Okay, where can you go to Waffle House and see the eclipse at the same time? And that's the map that you see here. It got picked up pretty quickly on social media, particularly after Waffle House retweeted it, which I took as one of my personal accomplishments as a scholar. Right, so it got shared. I think the final views was like 200,000 in terms of number of people who actually engaged with it on Twitter. I'm sure it was much more than that, kind of more broadly. I had lots of high school friends like, hey, it's great to see your map. I didn't know. So, it got picked up in press coverage as well. So my first and probably only interview in Chronicle of Higher Education was here. I had an article in National Geographic. The height of fame for any geographer, life hacker, even Golf Digest had an article on this map. So it really, kind of made me famous. CNN flew a film crew down, and then the story ended up going live for various reasons. I even, got swag from Waffle House. So I've got my Waffle House name tag here and my Waffle House camo hat. So I'll go ahead and put this on. that they sent to me as a thank you for publicizing them. We went to Waffle House on the day of the eclipse, and the waitresses wanted me to sign their hats so they could take it home as well. So I would say this was probably the most successful map I'll probably ever make, is the lesson here. So let's talk about what we learned from these maps. I'm going to try to run through this fairly briefly, like kind of what are some lessons that we took from this, and I'll state this as things that are still kind of ongoing. In terms of how we're trying to think about what was happening. How did each of these work? So the first thing is thinking about affect and group identity, right? So coming back to some of that literature on viral maps. Why Waffle House, right? This is a question in press interviews that I did. That was a question that came up in almost every one. Why did you choose Waffle House? And it's one of these intuitive things on one level, like why not Waffle House? You know, like Chick-fil-A wouldn't have worked in the same way. Like Chick-fil-A is more national. Like there's something about Waffle House. This is a piece from Rolling Stone that came out earlier this year. A guy named Bob Moser wrote it about what Waffle House means to Southerners. Aside from wealthy folks and northern transplants who don't care about having 2 days worth of food for $5.99, pretty much everybody in the South who isn't allergic to eggs and cheese or grease eats at Waffle House. Cracker Barrels are for white suburbanites, but Waffle Houses are by and large for everybody. Right? And this is not to say what Waffle House has its own problematic elements, but there's a certain democratic kind of everydayness. It's open 24 hours, it's everywhere. This is how we measure what happens when hurricanes hit, right? FEMA famously has its Waffle House index that if the Waffle House is closed, things are really bad, right? And it's this omnipresent part of Southern life specifically. So it's part of a Southern landscape. It's part of what it means to live in the South is to be near a Waffle House. And you see people having this affective reaction to Waffle House as a kind of as a subject that I think reflects that sense of group identity, that this is who I am. Of course, like Waffle House is part of this experience, right? So you have tweets that look like this. You have, somebody who's just like, yes, this Waffle House map with that GIF, that I'm a great public service. You have somebody who's making a pilgrimage to go to the Waffle House and tweets out and says, thanks for all your help. Right? So there's this kind of emotional response to it that I think is linked to the role that Waffle House has. You had some great imagery that came out of waffles and eclipses going together, right? So I think there's a certain degree to which you can just say, like, there's also something about the mundane and the cosmic going on here that I think catches on emotion, but it's engaging, right? And it relates to this deep sense that a lot of people have about Southern identity. Okay, second thing. So viral maps are read from a time and place, and this is meant to be kind of a response to thinking about Donna Haraway, the view from nowhere, that they're always read from somewhere. Maps are always read from somewhere as well. And so we can see how some of these maps, and I'm going to talk about Kyle's map more specifically here, is read from a particular location. So in this case, here's a piece from a Dallas publication that says, let's look at Dallas, and particularly looks at this neighborhood, North Oak Cliff, and is concerned about gentrification, right? So they're looking at high school and college-educated folks and saying, look at those blue dots, those college-educated folks moving into this neighborhood, and trying to read a local issue, right? Read something that's happening in a particular neighborhood based on this national map. Sometimes this is like kind of more clinical, sometimes this is a little more passionate. So this piece on Boston's most educated neighborhoods, now you're never supposed to read the comments section, but let's look at the comments section, right? You see people responding based on kind of a like local political reactionary kind of spirit. So there's a quote from the article, the educational patterns speak to other kinds of social sorting and segregation, all the stuff that we talk about as urban scholars. This person responds, it speaks louder about immature social, often poor minority parents having kids who don't care about education and hard work. Right? Or somebody else saying the white racist Bostonian who is liberal is insidious a racist as there is, and talking about Mattapan and how we value Mattapan in Boston. And so there's this kind of local politics, local conflicts, race and racism kind of playing out in the ways that people respond to this map. Right? In the case of the Waffle House map, you see some regional identity at play. So the tweet on the left here is from some Minnesota radio hosts saying, hey, look, we made it to the South to go to to see the eclipse, and look, there's a Waffle House here. We've arrived. Right? Or you have this debate on the right that's related to rednecks and Jeff Foxworthy and Waffle House and Walmart. That's about maintaining certain class and cultural identities. So if we think about like boundary objects as another terminology or another conceptual framework I've thought about here, but there's a way in which this articulates with local politics and the ways people position themselves within their communities. Then the last point, or really the last point, there's a 4, but it's a 3A. Is thinking about education and expertise. So obviously with this education map, people respond to it in different ways. You have headlines that say interactive map shows neighborhoods with the smartest residents. Well, college educated means smart, like people reacting to, well, expertise of the people who are being mapped, but also the expertise of the people doing the maps, right? So you had lots of folks who responded to these disputing, I think this is true about dot maps particularly, disputing the accuracy of the map, saying, hey, I looked at your dot map, in this case, like, my neighbor's here, could you put them on the map? Like, you missed them, I zoomed in, I did not see them listed here, right? Here's another one, better pull your map and rework it, you missed my house. In this case. And so there's a kind of like, well, you think you're an expert, but you're not really pulling it out. In my map, this was literally a 5-minute data pull from a commercial database. So I just had any business that had Waffle House in its name. You can't really see it on here, but there's a little dot right up in the Bay Area. And multiple people pointed that out as a discrepancy, right? Why is there a Waffle House in Sacramento, it says? This person actually did some more in-depth analysis of Waffle House locations and tried to find them in relation to highways. But again, it's about like, who's the authority of does the map maker know what they're doing or not? But at the same time, you have people like, yes, this is what education is about. So you have this true public servant comment. You have comments like this, I've never been prouder of my alma mater, from a UGA grad. And it's a great recruiting tool. I want to go back to grad school again just so I can study with you. Right? So there's a question here of whether or not these viral maps then become a way to start conversations. And this is my colleague Marshall Shepard really pressed me on this, of like, how can you tell people this isn't just what we do? We don't just sit around making stupid maps all day. And so I tried to think about ways to link it to research that I do on food accessibility and tide as well. And I think there's space there to think about how can viral maps be kind of an opening gambit, a gateway drug, we might say, into more serious research. So let's talk about implications here, because I've got about a minute left from thinking through this. So the first is that viral maps, right, reaffirm collective identities. If we think about them as phatic communication, they relate to who we are, they both speak to who we are and restate it, reinscribe it in certain ways. And then one question is, what groups see themselves in the maps that we make? What group identities do we engage with or do we exclude? If we think about some of the comments Sarah Bell made in her presentation in this spot yesterday about who's making maps, whose voices get heard in map making, in what ways are people's collective experience visible through the maps we make, or how can we more effectively engage with folks' experience? We can think about how viral maps are affective and effective. So we think a lot about affective cartography, but affective cartography would be like, what kinds of emotions do we engage with? Right? What's the emotional registers of our map making? I think for a lot of folks who do social science like I do, we want to disquiet, or, disrupt people's comfort. We want to make them feel upset, outraged, things like that. But are there more positive emotions we could potentially engage with? Or what is the emotional palette of the maps that we put together? We have to think about the fact that viral maps are used by spatially and temporally situated readers. So how do we get our timing down, especially for academics who operate on a month-to-month time scale? Like, I'll get that map to you in 4 months. Like, this is a really difficult challenge, right? I think folks who are in more public media or private sector have a little bit better handle on this perhaps, but thinking about how do we get our timing down to get that map there at the right time? How do we engage with folks at the local level around the way our maps get reused? Is there potential there as well? And then the last thing I'll say potentially is that maps reveal or show trust and distrust between map maker and their publics. To what extent can we see viral maps as potentially a way to start a conversation? So Anthony and I were talking about this last night and thinking about how could we take a serious issue and use a kind of viral approach to engage people to act in a certain way. So something like gerrymandering. What cartoon character is your voting precinct? But then link it to some kind of social action from that. So just in closing, I'm going to use this quote as a handoff here to part 2, thinking about viral map making. This is the end of Anthony's article. Cartographers have struggled to make maps that matter, maps that prompt change for the betterment of society and the environment, rather than simply react to those changes. Understanding how attention is directed in viral cartography could help us meet that challenge in the future. I think by paying attention to viral maps and the ways that they circulate and the factors that influence those, we can begin to think about how to make maps that are more effective and affective. So thank you so much for your time. I'm happy to take questions.
Thanks, Jerry, for pushing the social and social science. That was a really fun talk. Any questions? Oh, come on. Someone, the Waffle House fan? Okay.
Yeah.
Can we have your slides, please?
Yeah, I will. I'll put them up on Twitter. So they're on here, so I'll have the slides on Twitter. I've got a PDF. I was going to post it later on. Yeah, well, and I think the simplicity, I mean, that's not something that's on here. I think the simplicity does matter. So the question is, and since this is live streamed, the question is, any advice on timing? My basic response is I'm a social scientist, so I'm really good at asking questions. I'm not good at answering those questions. That's why I ask them. I would say that, I think that's something we need to work on. I think there's a certain degree to which you have to kind of lay the groundwork for what's, again, I'd point to talking to folks who do this in public, in media, in more public audiences. How do you kind of get the sense of when is that right time for this thing to go forward? And that's not just, I mean, in this case, this was kind of a freaky accident kind of thing, but you can kind of get a sense of reading the wind and what's a map that might speak to this particular. So like gerrymandering would be an issue of that. I feel like there would be something right now, if we could put together something tomorrow on gerrymandering in this moment before the election, there's a timing moment here. And I think that's something we could acknowledge.
Okay, let's thank Jared again
thanks.
for this.